And we're back. Hello again. Hello, Jason Isaacs. So last time we were looking at the primacy of the individual. Now we're moving on to the primacy of the state. Now the states came first. Before you can have a United States, you have to have the states. And what the Constitution tried to do was to uphold the integrity of the states, the primacy of the states, while providing for common defense and a way of ensuring that they all got along. You'll remember from that John Green video, that the biggest problem with the Articles of Confederation was that the federal government was the central government was profoundly undercooked. There was very, very little it could do. And so what they sought to do with this federal model was to strike some sort of happy medium and enable the states to get on with their thing, while the central government maintained for the national defense, the common defense, and made sure they all got along. So that was the general idea. Let's find out how well that worked. How was this enshrined? Well, again, our first point of call is the Constitution. What does the Constitution tell us? The Constitution is lovely. It says, well, the federal government has got these powers, the enumerated powers, learn them, and everything else accrues to the states. The reserved powers, that what the 10th Amendment, that whereof the Constitution is silent, the states may speak. That's mine, by the way. That doesn't say that in the Constitution, and apologies to Wittgenstein. But that whereof the Constitution is silent, the states may speak. That means that if the Constitution doesn't clearly say, here, the federal government, you do that, then it accrues to the states. However, there are within that concurrent powers, of which there aren't really that many. And to be honest, this isn't really where the bulk of the confusion lies. Fiscal responsibility, raising tax, spending money, and roads. They're two examples of concurrent powers. That's about all you need to know. Where we get the confusion is in the tricky clauses. And Pisces is one way of remembering the really tricky ones. The other tricky clause is the general welfare clause. The good news as far as the student is concerned is that the general welfare clause is so general, it's so vague, that it's rarely actually invoked as a way of justifying federal power. Much more along those lines are Pisces. Now, Pisces is one of my acronyms, and it means power clauses, power, interstate commerce, elastic, and supremacy. So your power clauses, interstate commerce, elastic, supremacy. Hopefully that will help you remember the really tricky clauses that serve to muddy the waters of the federal picture. So the problems, as I've said, is that we've got the states doing their own thing, the federal government ensuring that everyone gets along and will provide for a means of common defense. And already within that, there is an implicit paradox. If the states are doing their own things, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get along. And if they're not getting along, then the federal government is going to have to step in and make sure they do get along, in which case they won't be doing their own thing. This is basically the paradox of power. How can the states do their own thing if the federal government is responsible for making sure they all get along and there's a general consistent level of behavior? And that leads to questions of consistency. How much autonomy is the federal government allowed to tolerate before it steps in? Is it going to tolerate discrimination on the basis of colour? Is it going to allow discrimination? And obviously we amended the Constitution to stop that. But now we've got the question, can people discriminate on the basis of sexual preference and sexual inclination, LGBT issues, you know what I mean. So the question then is, how much autonomy, how much diversity is the federal government prepared to tolerate? And unfortunately, the answer is there is no clear guideline. The other thing that makes a mess of this is the history of the 20th century, the balance of power, the way in which power sometimes accrues to the federal government, sometimes swings back to the states. The problem is that states are pretty lousy at managing crisis. Now that's fairly understandable. If you've got a war, a financial crash, or a massive civil rights issue, you can't deal with that on a state-by-state basis. That's going to need the federal government to step in and fight a war. You can't fight a war in Europe on an Alabama basis, a Texas basis, a Florida basis. You can't meet a global financial crisis on a state-by-state basis. Montana can't do it, North Dakota can't do it. But however, the federal government might be able to deal with that. And with civil rights, it's about that consistency. You can't have slavery in one state and segregation in one state and freedom in the next state. So we've got a real problem there. The 20th century, this 100 years of crisis, the federal government kept getting dragged into things. until things calmed down a little bit. So in the 1970s, people said, look, enough of this. We had that catastrophic war in Vietnam. I think we've really gone about as far as we can do with this growing central government. Let's just get it back in its box. And that worked up to a certain point, and you should know the specific policies associated with new federalism. You should know that it was able basically to crawl towards the 90s. But then in the 21st century, what did we have? 16 years and counting of crisis, and what do you know? It's war, finance, civil rights. This time, civil rights based around LGBT issues rather than race. So what we've got here is an ebb and flow of power. Power accrued to the federal government while they were dealing with war, financial crisis and civil rights. Then there was a brief period when autonomy seemed to shift back towards the states. And then we had the events of 9/11 and the financial crisis of 2008 and the growing awareness that it was about time somebody did something about gay rights. And what do you know? Power accrued back to the federal government. These are the wedge issues now that are dividing people. We've got huge issues now that are too big to be dealt with on a state-by-state basis. The tipping point perhaps is marijuana. Marijuana right now is being dealt with on a state-by-state basis. Nebraska wasn't very happy about it, and so they complained, and the Supreme Court said, you know what, enough, get back in your box, we're not dealing with this, this is too big. You know, we've been fighting a losing war on drugs for long enough, maybe it's time to see if something else works. However, race, immigration, gay rights, all of these things are dividing the people, and they're too big. They're not allowed, they can't really vary from state to state. You can't allow discrimination against gays in one state and prohibit it in another. That's just barking. And people are people, and the 15th Amendment demands that everybody is treated equally. This has given rise to the idea of identity politics, and that in turn has fueled populism, that I am a certain person, I should be treated this way because I subscribe to a particular identity, and of course that's divisive. And that is why we wind up with Donald Trump running for presidency in 2016. And the question then becomes, can the centre hold? To what extent can the centre hold when we've got wedge issues and populism trying to pull the states apart? I don't know. I think I'm pretty sure the centre will hold. If it doesn't, the consequences would be ruinous. If the United States disintegrates, well, it's been nice knowing you, and I'll see you in the bunker. But we have got tremendous strain being put on this federal model as we speak, because people are becoming less and less prepared to accept the one-size-fits-all policy on wedge issues, on guns, on gay rights, on marijuana, and that is going to be a tremendous strain on the federal model. Will it hold? We don't know. Right now we've got the Supreme Court sitting in the middle, letting off steam here and there. The states are not suited to responding to crisis. We had a lot of those. We've had growing cynicism with central government and the rise of populism and identity politics. SCOTUS is again there. SCOTUS is letting off steam. It will strike down laws banning gay marriage. It will tell Colorado to keep going with its experiment. But that's not solving these issues. These wedge issues will lag society. Essentially what we've got society here, if you will. Then we go back here and we've got the Supreme Court, and then we go back here and we've got the Republican Party, and then we go back here and we've got the Constitution. So this is our timeline, if you will. Society is out here, society is experimenting with drugs and gay rights and all of that sort of stuff. SCOTUS, surprisingly, is more or less with it. Various individual states are still struggling to deal with that, and the Constitution, of course, is stuck way back in the past. And this is putting tremendous strain on the federal model. It's holding so far, but I think all of that is down to SCOTUS's ability to serve as a pressure valve and liberalise or legalise gay marriage and legalise experimentation with drugs. Okay, next up on the agenda is, the final conclusion is the Constitution out of date, or it's looking dangerously like it, because you can't have state autonomy with one-size-fits-all, with consistent application of civil rights, etc., etc., etc. And so there's tremendous strain on the federal model at the minute, and SCOTUS is critical in releasing that pressure from time to time. Next up is democratic government. There's no way I'm going to get through that within the time allotted by YouTube, so I'm going to pause that one there. We'll come back to this. See you shortly.